Well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us. It looks like our participants are rolling in right now as we speak. It's currently noon in Montana, so good afternoon from the Big Sky Country, Montana, no matter where you might be, and happy Sheep Week. We're sad we can't be joining you in Reno today, but we're glad we've got these technological abilities to connect us wherever in the world we all might be. So I only have 20 minutes. I'm going to kind of jump right into it. Um, but welcome again, everybody. And thank you for joining us live today. My name is Luke Coccoli. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for the Boone Crockett Club. Like I mentioned, I'm currently located in the Big Sky Country of Montana at the club's Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch. And I'm sitting in the lab classroom. You see this golden eagle behind me of the RASMUSON Wildlife Conservation Center. I believe we actually have also our headquarters office manager, Sandy Poston, somewhere in the virtual background, who can help answer questions. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the chat or the question and answer box, and we'll try to get all those answered before our 20 minutes is up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. I've got some slides for everybody to enjoy. And we'll get going. Basically, if no one's heard of Boone and Crockett before, this picture sums it up pretty well. We do just about everything wildlife habitat and hunting related that you can imagine, from publications to policy, from education, and of course our records department, if you're familiar with the big game scoring process as well. But I want to start today's presentation with a couple questions. First is, what is conservation? We'll offer a special prize to anyone who can define conservation in 5 words or less. So give that a try. And also, have you ever wondered where conservation started? Some North Americans say it began in the Dakota Territory, where Theodore Roosevelt traveled to in search of a new beginning. Others say it may have started in New York City, of all places, where the Boone and Crockett Club was founded in 1887. But no matter where the actual birthplace of conservation is located, it's never too early to start or too late to start talking about your own conservation ethic. And that's what we're going to kind of try to conceptualize today. The Boone and Crockett Club was founded in 1887, like I mentioned, by Theodore Roosevelt and another gentleman named George Bird Grinnell, making it the first national conservation organization to address the needs of big game nationwide. To a large extent, however, the history of conservation in general is the same as the history of North America. So, for example, think about the development of the Intercontinental Railroad. Railroads brought not only settlers, but also market hunters to the west and had the capability of transporting hides, skulls, and meat back east in a relatively quick fashion. The associated idea of something you've probably heard of called manifest destiny, however, left our country's virgin Western natural resources at risk if left unchecked and unmanaged. And early on in our nation's western expansion, this is exactly what happened. Basically, unregulated market hunting was occurring all across the West. So this guy right here, Theodore Roosevelt, started it all. It was in 1884 when his wife and mother passed away on the same day that TR packed his bags and headed west to find solitude in his grief. Settling in the Dakota Territory, TR was enthralled with his perception of the cowboy life and natural world and grew to be an avid hunter. He invested $14,000, which was a ton of money at that time, in what was called the Elkhorn Ranch. His experiences there taught him the problems of cattle overgrazing and showed him what the unchecked harvesting of beavers, bison, and other big game animals look like. TR was a prolific writer and published 3 books in his adventures in North Dakota, which made the plight of the West available to a wider audience. Think of these books like The Zoom back in the early 1800s, late 1800s rather. In one of his books, Hunting Trips of a Ranchman, TR wrote of the views from riding through the Dakota Territory in the late 1800s. He said, and I quote, "A ranchman who at the same time had made a journey of 1,000 miles across northern Montana along the Milk River told me that, to use his own expression, during the whole distance, he was never out of sight of a dead buffalo and never in sight of a live one." You can see some of those buffalo skulls and bones here in this image. And it really kind of brings to mind just how much overuse and exploitation of our wildlife resources was occurring back then. For this reason and many others, the ranching and hunting life TR lived and the detriments of the natural resources that he witnessed in the West is reason enough for some people to call the Dakota Territory the actual cradle of conservation. To others, however, it is in New York City where TR later gathered some of his closest hunting and outdoor enthusiast friends, which sparked the conservation movement, when Boone Crockett Club was initially proposed at a dinner party in early December of 1887. And to a fun fact, the Boone Crockett Club still convenes every December, the first Saturday in December, and we just got done hosting our first ever virtual meeting last month. The initial members of the Boone Crockett Club consisted of men of influence such as George Bird Grinnell, who had a large deal to do with creating Glacier and Yellowstone National Parks. He's one of the gentlemen in the picture on the right-hand side of the screen. And Gifford Pinchot, who was the first chief of the United States Forest Service, but who, like TR, felt that the big game and animal habitats needed to be protected from unchecked westward expansion. One of the first things the club did, and in my mind, one of their most forward-thinking ideas, was to create what is called the National Collection of Heads and Horns in 1906. When the exhibit opened in 1922, engraved above the front door were the words, "In memory of the vanishing big game of the world." The thought at the time was that literally many of, if not most of, these big game species were bound to go extinct in the near future. If the club acted now, they could begin to make change. But if not, at least they would have a vast collection of specimens where the public could go and view what may have become the once was of species. This collection is still maintained today and is housed at the Wonders of Wildlife Museum in Springfield, Missouri. If anyone ever gets a chance to go visit the Bratz Pro Shops Museum down there, it's a fabulous place. Because natural resources, including wildlife, represent the health and wealth of a country and its people, the club knew that they needed to act quickly and effectively to end this ongoing era of extermination that was happening. A system, essentially, would need to be created to make the needed changes for the sake of wildlife and wild places in North America. We are very fortunate in North America to now have a proven system which not only recognizes these values, but also provides for and directs the proper use and management of these resources. So what so many of the Boone Crockett Club members began to work toward is now called the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation. And it is anchored by a Supreme Court decision that decreed that wildlife was common to all and belongs to the people, and not government, not corporations, and not any individuals themselves. It represents how we as the people as a whole view these natural resources and directs how this natural resource is to be used and managed under sustainable guidelines for the betterment of wildlife and people. It is the reason why we still have abundant wildlife populations in the US and Canada and the opportunity to freely hunt, fish, or enjoy wildlife, each in our very own ways. So we're going to run through the 7 tenets of the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation real quickly. Basically, the first is in the public trust, or the public trust doctrine. This means that the notion of public ownership of wildlife is actually an ancient concept going back to Roman times, but this idea was reinterpreted on European soils, where oftentimes the noblemen, say the king or queen, for example, were the public and own all the lands, including all the wildlife on them. So under these circumstances, the common man, just Joe Public, often had no access to these natural resources or hunting, and killing a deer was actually considered theft, which could have very severe consequences. Next is the prohibition of commerce of dead wildlife, which means basically it will be illegal to sell the meat of any wild animal in North America. This was of paramount significance due to the early destruction of North American wildlife, as its commercial value was basically put up for sale, which went against the very grain of the public trust doctrine, which again means you and I and everyone owns this wildlife. It was critical to establish that the taking of wildlife was to be for personal use, including to feed one's own family, and to put an end to the sale of dead wildlife in whole or in parts for profit. Third is the allocation of wildlife by law. Basically, here we're thinking the mere presence of man on a landscape can negatively affect wildlife and the habitats that support them if left unchecked. So the rule of law, instead of the rule of chance, should be used to govern the appropriate use of these wildlife resources. So the Boone and Crockett Club proposed laws and rallied public support for these new rules of order. The club helped establish government agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Forest Services, and all these other agencies that were needed to oversee the proper execution and enforcement of laws. Next is opportunity for all. We all know that public access to wildlife, regardless of social or economic status, including hunting, fishing, and trapping, is actually a right of our citizenship. It is also fundamental to conservation because people will value what they have access to. If you can use something, you enjoy it more, right? And what has no value, what you can't use, is basically neglected. And that's not what we want for our natural resources. So this access fosters individual stewardship and provides the funding necessary to properly manage wildlife resources in a sustainable manner. There's a thing called the Pittman-Robertson Act, which as we as hunters, as fishermen, buying our licenses, buying hunting equipment, we actually pay back into the conservation model by supporting our state wildlife agencies through funding through what's called an excise tax on those goods. Next, non-frivolous use. In North America, we can legally kill certain wildlife for legitimate purposes under strict guidelines for food, for fur, and self-defense or property protection. Laws are in place to restrict casual killing or poaching, killing for commercial purposes, wasting of game, and mistreating wildlife. Getting close to the end here, international resources, the sixth tenet. The proper management of certain species of migrating wildlife is to be managed by international treaties and laws. The Boone and Crockett Club responded with the establishment of the National Wildlife Refuge System and the passage of the Migratory Bird Act. The topic also appears when categorizing 17 different categories of big game species in our record-keeping system. For example, moose. Here you see the 3 subspecies of moose that the Boone and Crockett Club recognizes and just how vast their distribution is across North America. They're truly an international resource. They cross state, provincial, and even countries' different boundaries or borders. Last but not least, managed by science. The intricate nature of ecosystems and biotic communities of which all wildlife and man belong will be managed under the knowledge of science rather than just someone's opinion or conjecture. One very interesting scientific tool that many wildlife researchers use here in Montana are radio collars, trail cameras. If you've ever used a trail camera as well, is technically, a wildlife science tool. And that's exactly what we have here. A grizzly bear actually wearing a radio collar captured on trail camera on this Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch where we're at here today. I haven't quite got a bead on our question and answer box here, but we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about the Boone and Crockett Club's Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch, where we are today. I'm just quickly scrolling through the Q&A box here. Here's a good one. Did Teddy Roosevelt become president after he founded the Boone and Crockett Club? He certainly did. Are there any types of fish or other wildlife that don't migrate? That's a great question. All wildlife have their home ranges. Grizzly bears, for example, have a home range of a couple hundred miles, but they don't migrate south for the winter or anything. They actually hibernate during the winter. The Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch is just over 6,000 acres. I see that question here coming up. Let's identify our definition of conservation real quick. I see Caden says conservation is a status of an animal. That's pretty good, short definition. So conservation in terms of the Boone and Crockett definition in 4 words, I'm going to do it in 4 words, is wise use without waste. Wise use without waste. So the club purchased the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch in 1987 as part of the centennial celebration, the Boone Crockett Club turning 100 years old. And I tell people the Boone Crockett Club was basically walking the walk and not just talking the talk of conservation anymore. They bought this 6,000 acre parcel, and it was a working cattle ranch in the past, and they maintain a working cattle ranch to this day. So we've got about 500 head of Black Angus cattle that graze on the ranch all year. And we also have a significant amount of wildlife species as well: mule deer, whitetail, elk, mountain lions, wolves, grizzly bears, and black bears. Also on the ranch is what we call our Rasmuson Wildlife Conservation Center. This is a 5,000 square foot building that was built in 2001, and it serves as our base camp for several different really cool conservation education programs. We actually have a live webcam. If you tuned into Sheep Week, you can visit the Boone and Crockett booth and click on the video tab and see our video there. Or you can simply look on YouTube for the Boone and Crockett Club channel and click on live views of the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch to see it that way. One thing we do here at the ranch during the summer months is host outdoor adventure camps for middle school and high school age youth from all around the country. We go hiking, we go fishing, fly fishing, fly tying, sleep a night under the stars next to the campfire. We do a whole day of shooting sports, 22, shotgun, archery, and we take some trips into the local wilderness areas. Another cool program we do, which is entirely wilderness focused, is our Montana High Adventure Base for anyone in scouting. We do 5 and 10 day treks in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is just behind the ranch, and it's just over 1 million acres in size. And we go pack rafting. So you see these paddles and these folks as backpacks here. It's an ultra light philosophy. So we're packing as little as we possibly need and can get away with using in the backcountry. And then we paddle ourselves through about 50 miles of wilderness whitewater rivers in the backcountry areas. And then we do a series of other hunter education courses. We've got a shooting range on the ranch, and we are open to public hunting as well. So we see deer hunters, elk hunters, archery hunters, and rifle hunters. And in Montana, traditionally you had to be 12 years old. I see Serenity has a question here. How old do you have to be to get into hunter safety? The typical answer is 12, but actually in Montana now you can have an adult mentor and you can get into hunting at age 10, which is really cool as well. Let's see what other questions we can pick up here. We just have a couple more minutes left. I, again, appreciate everybody joining today. Looks like we have over 60 participants. That is awesome. Can all animals have a tracking collar? Well, not all of them. You've got to catch one first. So that's the trick for a lot of scientists, but they're able to do that, for deer or sheep out of helicopters or using nets. With bears, we actually use big culvert traps baited with sometimes meat from like roadkill. I am not a member of the Boone and Crockett Club. I am just a staff of the Boone and Crockett Club, but you can be in the Boone and Crockett Club by signing up as an associate member. So check that out on our website at www.boone-crockett.org. What ammunition is allowed at camp? We shoot 22 rifles, 12 gauge and 20 gauge shotguns, and 22 pistols as well. And they made the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch in 1987. That one is for Madison. The big pile of heads in that picture, those were all buffalo skulls. So let's go back to that one real quick, just so everyone can get a sense of kind of the exploitation of game in the late 1800s. So if you see at the very top of the screen, there's actually a guy standing on top of this pile holding up one buffalo skull. But that tells you just how important conservation is, how important science is, and laws and regulations to maintain healthy wildlife habitats for us now, but also for future generations. Our camp is only here at the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch. Again, check us out on our website under the Learn tab for more information on our summer camps and education programs. But we are, again, located in Montana, just south of Glacier National Park. So if anyone's interested in coming out and visiting the ranch or attending a camp, you can find information there, or follow us on our Instagram at Outdoor Adventure Camps. Again, thank you, everybody. I think that hit about our 20-minute mark there. So I'm not sure if Karen's going to cut me off or if we can keep going. I encourage you to check out all the other cool seminars going on today. They put together an amazing schedule. And if you have access to, go check out the Boone Crockett booth on the Wild Sheep Foundation floor. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you guys have a great day and a fabulous weekend, and we will talk with you all later.